Carlos, qué bueno saber que sigues con el interés de nutrirte de la terapia Gestalt con perspectiva de campo. Yo soy Dani Mora, quien te acompaña en este proyecto, y hoy el tópico girará en torno a el campo de la supervisión en la terapia Gestalt, procesos paralelos, papeles invertidos y fuerzas de campo. Para esto nos va a estar acompañando desde Austria la doctora Nancy Amendt-Lyon. Voy a presentar un poco de su perfil profesional. Ella es nacida en Nueva York y cursó estudios de psicología en Estados Unidos, Suiza y Austria, donde obtuvo un máster y un doctorado. Su formación profesional se centra en la terapia Gestalt y el psicoanálisis de grupo. Desde el 1978 mantiene su consulta privada. Entre el 2007 y el 2021 presidió la Asociación Austriaca de Terapia Gestalt. Es miembro de la Asociación Austriaca de Psicoterapia y de la Asociación Europea de Terapia Gestalt, con amplia experiencia en la formación de terapeutas gestálticos, psicoanalistas de grupos y supervisores en Austria y en otros países. Además, colabora como formadora externa en el Instituto de Formación Checo Gestalt Estudia. Es miembro de pleno derecho del Instituto de Terapia Gestalt de Nueva York y miembro honorario de la Asociación Austriaca de Terapia Gestalt. Su labor académica incluye numerosos artículos y capítulos de libros en inglés y alemán sobre terapia Gestalt, género y temas sociopolíticos, así como participación en los consejos editoriales de diversas revistas especializadas. Así que miremos un poco el rol de la supervisión en el proceso terapéutico y en la formación clínica, y nuevamente, como siempre les digo, disfruten de esta entrevista. Y hoy estoy maravillado de tener esta entrevista con Nancy Amendt-Lyon. Gracias por estar aquí, me encanta tenerla en este espacio, sobre todo porque vamos a estar hablando sobre el campo de la supervisión en la terapia Gestalt, procesos paralelos, papeles invertidos y fuerzas de campo. Bienvenida a este espacio. ¿Cómo está, doctora Nancy?
Dr. Nancy, I like that. I'm feeling quite well, thank you, and I'm excited to speak with you and hear your questions and see what you and I can develop today.
Ok. Bueno, comencemos con la primera pregunta, que es una introducción a la temática de hoy, es ¿de qué manera contribuye la supervisión al proceso terapéutico y en el desarrollo tanto del terapeuta como del paciente?
I see supervision as a lifelong process for psychotherapists. I don't see it as only part of someone's training. For me, supervision is the reflection of your professional behavior and your attitude. So this helps the therapist to keep a good balance. It helps them to reflect on difficulties with patients. It helps them to get another point of view if they're stuck when they work with someone. It helps them to realize if their caseload is overburdened. It helps them to realize that perhaps their work morale is not very good. It also helps them to understand if the therapist and the patient are a good fit. So I see it as something that we must do, or we are lucky to be able to do, as long as we practice. I see it as a wonderful opportunity, and I do peer supervision constantly. I do it every 2 weeks with 2 colleagues, and I'm very grateful for this chance because it helps me a lot.
Bueno, y seguimos. ¿Qué pertenece al campo de la supervisión en terapia Gestalt?
What belongs to it? Well,
Yes.
I'm not sure if I completely answered the first question because I think I left out the part how it can help the patient.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And also, yeah, how it contributes to a therapeutic process and the development of both the therapist and the patient.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's part of the therapist's professional development to reflect on himself or herself, and it helps a therapeutic process that is in difficulties. The patient benefits from it because the therapist is getting support from outside. So it's always beneficial for the therapeutic process.
Great. So we'd like to know what belongs to the field of supervision in Gestalt therapy.
Yeah, I see the field as something rather large. I see it as the patient's background, the there and then, the patient's present situation, the here and now, what the patient is suffering from, the patient's motivation, the patient's significant relationships, and how the patient sees the therapeutic relationship. Then I also see another part is relating to the therapist. That's the therapist's background, the there and then, the therapist's present situation, the here and now, the state of professional development, work morale. Is their caseload balanced or not? Are they exhausted? Are they in good shape? And how they experience the fit with the patient. Are they able to engage with the patient? Are they able to mutually adjust in their relationship? Is it productive? Then I also see the supervisor's contribution. That's the supervisor's background, the supervisor's present situation, where they are in their professional development, and how well they work with the supervisee, if this is a good fit or not. Beyond that, I think it's important that we don't see supervision just from a psychological point of view. We need to take in the larger field. There's the social situation. There's the political situation. There's the economic situation. There are questions of religious questions, rules and norms in the society. Are they refugees? Are they living in times of war? There are many questions that factor in to supervision, and we shouldn't just stay on a solely psychological level. I think we have to bring these all in because they affect us. Just to give you 2 examples, doing supervision during the pandemic, during COVID, was very different from doing supervision if I can see people face to face. Yeah. We did supervision, even groups online, which with a lot of effort can function, but it's very different from being in a room with people and seeing them move and sensing them and smelling them. Yeah. Or doing supervision as I do with colleagues from Ukraine ever since the war broke out, which is a very special situation. And naturally, the situation of war must factor into supervision. We just can't do business as usual.
But the supervision worked in an online environment, or maybe it doesn't really work very well.
It works, but it's always my second choice.
En su artículo hace referencia a varios términos que me gustaría que pudiera desplegar un poco y por eso voy a continuación a hacer algunas preguntas relacionadas con esto. ¿Cómo cambia el campo cuando practicamos roles invertidos en la supervisión gestáltica?
I will gladly do that. I think that there are very many different models of practicing supervision, and I experienced a number of them in my training and over the years. Often supervisors try to have a kind of master class where a supervisee discusses a patient and the supervisor tells them what they're doing wrong or what they could do differently. And often this is a shaming situation. And sometimes the supervisee will be asked to sit in the middle of a circle in a group supervision and present their patient, and then the supervisor will work with the supervisee as if the supervisee were the patient. Or a supervisee might have an empty chair and embody himself or herself and the patient, and then switch roles. What I call reversed roles is something that has emerged in my practice in the last 30 years. And just before we sat down for this interview, I thought I'll show it to you with little puppets, okay? I chose this one as, this is the supervisor, okay? The older lady, okay? And I have this, do you recognize him? This is the therapist, okay? So when the therapist comes to the supervisor for supervision, there is always the patient, okay? So we have the two couples. We have the therapist with the patient, and we have the supervisor with the therapist, okay? When I practiced reversed roles in a group supervision, the therapist will discuss a patient, but the therapist will slip into the role of the patient, and someone else from the group will slip into the role of the therapist. So a colleague from the group will try a new way of relating to the patient in the group. And the therapist, who is the supervisee, will try to embody their own patient. So the supervisee identifies with their own patient and slips into this role. And someone else from the group will try to be a therapist who approaches this difficult situation in a new way. We all have different sensory strengths, different ways of dealing with patients. One person might be more visual. Another person might be more acoustic. Someone else might be more into movement, kinesthetics. Some person might want to draw with the patient, yeah? And this other colleague in the group will bring in their own sensory strengths, yeah? And work with a therapist who is actually the patient. Yeah? So we have two couples. We have the supervisory couple, and then we have the therapist with the patient, and the therapist becomes the patient and works with a new therapist. And we get a lot of new insights from this new constellation. And it is not so asymmetrical as it would be if the supervisor were leading the session this way, but we have two peers from the group who are interacting. And it's very liberating for someone to embody their own patient. They can exaggerate, they can let loose, they can embody everything that annoys them or puzzles them, or try to understand what's going on and what isn't really verbally expressed. And the new therapist has the chance to try something out. There's nothing that they can do wrong, yeah? There are no right answers, it's just a different approach. So this is a big experiment. Everyone is treading on new territory, and it's a very creative process, because at the end of the experiment, everyone kind of debriefs and shakes out their hands and goes back to their old roles. And the person who embodied the patient usually gets a lot of insights into what's going on in their patient. And the person who embodied the therapist realizes what it's like to work with this patient and also gets a lot of insights. And then the supervisor, naturally, and the other people in the group who have been observing also give feedback in the form of their immediate emotional response. And the immediate emotional response is very often a bodily sensation, a tightening of the throat, a dizziness, a fuzziness, feeling cramped, getting annoyed, feeling ashamed, being silent, not knowing what to say. And this is incredibly valuable information. This is not anything to be ashamed of. There's nothing wrong. This is a present, yeah? This is like getting a big package with all kinds of valuable information that we need to be curious about because it helps us to understand a message that would otherwise just leave us in the dark. This is a way for the patient, through the therapist, to convey something that they could not express otherwise.
Hay algo ahí sumamente llamativo y que me ha inquietado mucho y necesito saber algo, su percepción acerca de esto, y es cómo funciona el campo cuando se trae la historia del paciente a la aquí y ahora del grupo, y este grupo empieza a resonar con la historia del paciente que no está presente en ese aquí y ahora. ¿Cómo funciona el campo entonces?
It's not easy to say because this is a co-creation. These dynamic relations kind of emerge. We can't say that it goes unilaterally. It's not going from the patient-therapist relationship into the supervisory relationship, and it's also not going from the supervisory relationship into the therapist-patient relationship. But when a supervisee talks about the situation with the patient, they are, whether they're aware of it or not, giving everyone else a lot of information about the patient and about the dynamics. So everyone in the group, everyone in the field is picking up what's going on there, and everyone is reacting to it in their way, which is part of the whole matrix. Yeah, it's part of the whole matrix of the field. And this is then part of their contributions in the form of feedback to understanding the mystery that the patient is presenting.
Sumamente interesante. Ahora, ¿cómo influyen los procesos paralelos en el campo de la supervisión gestáltica?
I think we need to look at parallel processes as inevitable in relational fields. They're ubiquitous. Yeah. Years ago in psychoanalysis, they used to think that parallel processes only went from the patient therapist into supervision. But then researchers realized that it goes in the other way. And from a field perspective, it's something that's co-created because we keep going back and forth between the fields, whether or not we realize it. So by identifying with our patient's experience, we are embodying this, and we bring this into our supervision, either individual or group. And this affects the supervision relationship or the supervision group. And also difficulties that a supervisor might be having in his or her own life, or difficulties that a supervisor and a supervisee might be having can also be brought into a therapeutic relationship. Yeah, it can go different ways. So what we aren't able to express, what we have difficulties with, what we're struggling with, what we have no words for, is somehow reenacted in different fields. It's transposed, it's transported.
Ok, Dani, nos movemos hacia la siguiente pregunta.
Sí, claro. Entonces, ¿qué entendemos por fuerzas de campo y cómo afectan a la situación en la supervisión gestáltica?
Yeah, I got my master's degree in New York at the New School for Social Research. And there I met one of the most inspiring teachers, Mary Henley, who worked with Gestalt psychologists, Kurla and Kafka. And the New School was a meeting point for many of the German scientists or European scientists, many of them Jews, who fled from the Nazis, and they were given jobs at this university. And Mary Henley referred to Kurla when she talked about the dynamics of field forces and the importance of this term for understanding motivation. She said field forces are those motivational forces that emerge from parts of the psychological field other than the individual. In her theory, there is a difference between the locus and the reference of experience. All experiences that we have are based on physiological processes within the organism. That's the locus. But they don't only refer to us as individuals. Very often, our motivations or experiences are referring to other parts of the psychological field, things that come from, so to speak, the environment, although we are always of the field in Gestalt therapy. For example, there can be forces that emerge from what a person experiences as the requirements of a situation, or as the requirements of persons and events outside the self. They call this field forces. Like if we feel we're compelled to do something, if we feel we have to act, and this isn't coming from something that is an intrinsic motivation, but we feel that we are being forced into do this. Mary Henley calls this being caught in a web of circumstances. And she says the intrinsic motivations, the ones that arise from within a person, or they perceive as being as emerging from within themselves, she calls ego forces. And the forces that the person feels will refer to as part of the perceived environment are the field forces. And these forces always interact and complement each other. Yeah? They always work together. For example, if there is loud music or gunfire, or a threatening situation, this doesn't affect everyone equally. You have to be able to perceive it. If you're deaf, you can't hear the gunfire. You have to be able to react. So that means you can't be in prison, in chains, in a coma, and you need to be motivated. So these things have to work together in order for any action to take place. So a person must perceive the demands of a situation. Then their resources and their experiential background have to be mobilized. If a person doesn't perceive even very compelling demands in a situation, or if they can't respond appropriately, then no action will be implemented. So before field forces can operate, a person's ego forces, what they feel is coming from within themselves, their resources and their motivation have to be accessible. And Mary Henley always said that motives and emotions also have cognitive qualities. So the affective and the cognitive aspects of an experience can't clearly be separated. They always work together.
Y bueno, ¿cuáles serían las tareas del supervisor cuando se adopta una perspectiva de campo en la supervisión gestáltica?
Well, one very important prerequisite is that they're responsible for the setting, for the location, for the time, for facilitating the whole meeting. If it's a group, they need to make sure that everyone is involved, that everyone has space for what they need to discuss, that everyone is contributing to the group discussion, no one is left out. They need to help the supervisees articulate clarifying questions that they would like to be addressed before we experiment, and to also define a focus. You have to ask a supervisee, what would you like us to focus on? What questions you have to the group? What do you need from the group? What would you like to get done today? Yeah, to try to focus it, not just throw it in and say, this is my patient, but what's our focus? What do we want to experiment with? What do we want to understand? Once we have someone who wants to present and we have a participant to reverse roles with and conduct the experiment, we, as supervisors, if someone is stuck, either the new therapist or the patient, we suggest maybe a change of strategy, or we suggest maybe that someone else from the group takes on the role of the therapist if someone really doesn't know how to proceed further. And this is something that when groups are comfortable with this form, if they're used to it, if they're familiar with it, this is no problem at all to switch roles. For beginners, it can be destabilizing or inhibiting. They might feel they're doing something wrong. So I am very careful using this process with beginners. I usually use it more with more seasoned therapists. If the whole group is stuck and they don't know how to proceed further, as the supervisor, I may jump in and be either the therapist or the patient, yeah, and see what I can bring about. I'm kind of the last resort as the supervisor. I offer my immediate emotional feedback also, like all the other members of the group. And I also might suggest further avenues to explore. Yeah, where could you possibly continue with this patient, or what other areas could you look at, or possible experiments with the patient to open up certain questions. I would also offer theoretical inputs and perhaps references to certain professional literature, and I would try to show where theory and practice connect. Yeah? That's an important part of supervision. And last, and certainly not least, I would suggest, and I take this advice seriously myself, that in certain circumstances, such a supervision experience will show you what you should be addressing in your own personal therapy. Because it might show you something where you have a blind spot, or where something is still very raw, or something you never realized before. And it can be very, very helpful and supportive to look for outside support if you realize this in supervision.
Tengo una nueva pregunta que iba generando mientras la escuchaba. Ahora, estaría interesante que pudiera hacer una distinción entre una supervisión clásica, donde hay una posición de saber del supervisor y hay interpretación, y una supervisión desde la perspectiva de campo.
We're bringing ourselves into the field as part of the equation. Yeah, we're not working on a patient. We're not dissecting a patient and the patient's neurosis or psychosis or borderline disturbance. We are understanding dynamics. We are understanding the dynamics of the patient therapist relationship through the eyes of the supervisor and supervisee. We're trying to understand what's going on by bringing ourselves in and sharing our immediate emotional and bodily reactions. This is helping us to find a new language and to discover more. We're working with curiosity and astonishment and interest, with a joy for experimentation. It's very creative because we're trying things out and we have the chance to maybe exaggerate a little bit or be a little over the top just for the sake of emphasis. And we're not judging, unless someone is doing something that is completely against the code of ethics of psychotherapy. We're not judging. We're trying to help people do what they do well, even better. So we're trying not to interpret, but rather to understand. And we are bringing ourselves in as part of the means of understanding. We're in the equation. We are of the field. We're not observing under a microscope.
Y también sería interesante poder saber un poco de su propia motivación y su interés de profundizar en el campo de la supervisión. Entonces, si podría dar incluso algunas viñetas o ejemplos clínicos de una supervisión desde este modelo, sería bastante interesante.
Some clinical examples. Oh boy. Well, some of them are in the article that's going to be appearing, which I hope you'll read when it's out. I had in a small group, I had a supervisee, a woman who had difficulty with a female patient. And this female patient was giving very contradictory messages. She would say, all the men I go out with, all they want to do is sleep with me right away. But she would also describe how she would get ready for these dates, and she would dress herself in a very, very sexy, tempting way. So she was giving these men the signal, I'm available. And on the other hand, she would complain that they just wanted sex. And my supervisee would get very confused, and she didn't know what this patient wanted, and she had a lot of trouble emotionally connecting to this woman. So I suggested a role reversal, and she did. And if I remember correctly, I think even a man slipped into the role of the therapist, into the role of the patient, and the supervisee became her own patient, and a man took the role of the therapist. That's what it was. And the male therapist would ask her, what do you want from these dates? What do you want in a relationship? And she had a hard time discussing it. And finally she said, my friends also tell me that I want two different things. I want a good relationship with a man, and part of me wants sex, but the other part of me just wants to be left alone. At the end of the experiment, the supervisee realized that she was just as confused as the patient was. Everyone in the room was confused. And it was only after this supervisee had another few sessions with the patient that she realized the patient's mother was in a very deep depression. She had a lot of trouble relating to the patient. She had no real resonance with her mother. And it was only after she could discuss this with a therapist that the two of them could connect. But being told you want two contradictory things, you want two things that contradict each other at the same time, helped her to realize, hey, I'm impeding myself. I'm giving myself a terrible obstacle, and I don't know why. I don't understand it. But it was very interesting, and I'm repeating this here by confusing you with who's the therapist and who's the patient. I realized this is also a parallel process, that the whole group was confused. Everyone didn't know, what are we talking about? What does she want? Yeah. It was repeated in the supervision as it was in the therapy.
Y no quiero dejar pasar de dónde su interés o su motivación sobre la profundización de este tema. ¿Por qué resulta importante?
About supervision in general, or the field perspective?
Ambas. Ambas.
Both.
Both. Well, it's something that's grown very close to my heart, and I enjoy it very much. I enjoy doing individual supervision, and I have several steady supervision groups with countries that surround Austria, with Czech and Slovak colleagues, with Hungarian colleagues, and with Ukrainian colleagues. And I find it very enriching. I find it very rewarding, and it's a wonderful chance for me to learn. Yeah? It's not only the supervisees who are benefiting from this. It's very, very enriching for me as a supervisor. And there's also the aspect of generativity, that I feel like I'm trying to give what I've learned and my experience and my knowledge to the next generation.
Qué rico escucharla. Ahora, como para cerrar y a modo de conclusión, ¿cuándo es necesario supervisar? Sobre todo digo esto porque no es sencilla la supervisión, dado que los terapeutas vemos nuestros puntos ciegos y todo lo que empieza a resonar con nosotros, y el mismo terapeuta pone en el campo de su propio fondo, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cuándo supervisar?
Well, as I suggested at the beginning, I see it as a lifelong process. I think psychotherapists should always be in some kind of supervision, either individual or group or peer supervision, because research on professional effectiveness and satisfaction with your profession and burnout prevention all show that people who engage in supervision are much more successful and satisfied and productive than people who neglect to be in supervision. Supervision is also especially important when you realize you're making exceptions. This is a patient I like very much. This is a patient I don't like at all. This person gets on my nerves. I forgot that I had this patient this week and I went out for coffee and cake with my friends. Yeah. I double booked his session and gave it to somebody else. Whenever you're making exceptions, it's time to look at your therapeutic relationship more carefully. Yeah? Also, if you realize this is someone who is suffering from something that you are unfamiliar with or you need help. For example, I don't really feel very competent to work with people who engage in substance abuse. So I usually refer them to colleagues who have been well trained for this. So if someone has been in therapy with me for a while, and only after a while do they disclose to me that they are either doing drugs or drinking alcohol, whatever, I usually look for support from outside. We need to know when we need outside support. It shouldn't be something we feel ashamed about. This is not like getting remedial reading in school. This is something that we need, like exercise, yeah, in order to stay fit as therapists.
Sumamente valiosos sus aportes por la importancia que tiene todo lo relacionado con la supervisión, ¿sí? La práctica clínica siempre va a implicar una supervisión y qué bueno escuchar todo este discurso viniendo de usted. Así que muchísimas gracias por su participación. Yo quedo sumamente nutrido con toda su experiencia y todo lo que ha tenido para compartir con nosotros.
You're very welcome. I enjoyed it.
Bueno,
Thank you.
muchísimas gracias. Como siempre les digo a todos mis ponentes, un abrazo gigante desde Colombia y seguimos estableciendo estos puentes que me parecen tan importantes y tan ricos.
So a big hug from Colombia, and we look forward to reading your article. When is it
Yes.
going to get published?
It should come out this spring. It's a double issue of the journal Gestalt Review. It's in 2 sections. There are 2 different editors who they each collected articles, and it should be coming out this spring. So you can either order that one issue or get a subscription, which also gives you access to all the online prior editions of the journal. I can give you the email address of the editor-in-chief. I'm an associate editor, and if you order it through the Gestalt International Study Center, it's less expensive than doing it through the publisher.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Un gusto habernos conocido y un gran abrazo.
Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.